My sister waited until the pie was served. I'll always remember that. She let everyone get their pie, because Linda has never once in 63 years staged a scene without an audience seated and comfortable. Then she reached into her handbag, and she laid a folded letter on my dining room table 5 months after we buried my husband, and she said, in a voice she'd clearly rehearsed in the car, "I wasn't going to do this yet, but I can't keep carrying it. Chuck wanted me to have the lake cottage. He wrote it all down 3 years ago. He said Dorothy would understand." 14 people around my table, my son, my nieces, Chuck's brother and his wife. And my sister holding the letter out, not to me, mind you. She handed it to Chuck's brother because Linda understands chain of custody the way all performers do. Never let the skeptic touch the prop first. It went around the table like a collection plate. I watched my family read my husband's handwriting, the careful capitals, the little hook he put on his Y's, the signature I'd watched cross 42 years of checks and anniversary cards. I watched their faces change, one by one, and I watched them start, one by one, to not look at me. "His signature," Chuck's brother said, quiet. "Dot, that's Chuck's signature." I let the pie sit untouched in front of me. When the letter finally came around to me, I held it by the edges. Habit, friends, 40 years of habit. And I read my husband's warm, dead voice telling the world he'd secretly promised our cottage, our dock, our 400 sunrises a year to my sister. And I felt the table waiting for me to do something a grieving widow does. Instead, I turned the letter over once, gently, the way you'd turn a sleeping baby. I looked at it for exactly as long as I needed to, and something went very still and very quiet in the center of me. Because in the first 8 seconds, friends, I had already seen it. One small thing, one impossible little thing that 30 years of training will not let your eye slide past, no matter whose pie is on the table. I handed the letter back to my sister, and I said the only sentence I would say about it for the next 3 weeks. "What a beautiful letter, Linda. You should keep it somewhere very safe." She thought she'd won. You could see it, the flush, the tremble of relief. My whole family thought that was a surrender. Not one of them remembered, in that moment, what I did for a living for 30 years, in 311 trials, under oath, with a loop in my hand. My name is Dorothy Lang. I'm 67 years old. I'm a retired forensic document examiner. And my sister had just handed me, across my own pie plates, in front of 14 witnesses, the most examinable document I had ever seen in my life. But before I show you what was wrong with that letter, you need to know about the cottage, and about Chuck, and about why my sister believed, truly, in her bones believed, that she was owed a lake. I spent 30 years reading paper for the courts. Wills, ransom notes, doctored ledgers, suicide notes that weren't, love letters that were evidence, once, I'm still not permitted to say where, a treaty. People think handwriting analysis is a parlor trick, like reading palms. It isn't, friends. It's carpentry. Ink has a chemistry. Paper has a biography. Pressure has a habit. A signature is not a picture. It's a recording of a body in motion, and bodies cannot lie in motion the way faces lie at rest. I qualified as an expert in 311 trials across 4 states. Defense hired me, prosecution hired me, and I told them both the same thing, because paper doesn't have a side. My teacher, old Mr. Abernathy, drilled it into me my first year. The document is the only witness that never forgets, never flatters, and never wants anything. Your whole job, Dorothy, is to not want anything either. Hold on to Mr. Abernathy. He comes back at the end. Chuck and I bought the cottage on Loon Lake, up in northern Minnesota, in 1987. 4 rooms, cedar shingles, a dock with a wobble we never fixed, because the wobble told you where you were. He was a high school shop teacher. I read documents. We were not lake house people by money. We were lake house people by obsession. We ate off card tables for 6 years to make the down payment. And Chuck did every repair himself for 3 decades. And if you want to know our whole marriage in one image, it's this. Him on the dock at dawn with coffee and the twins' game murmuring on a battery radio. Me on the porch with a case file. Neither of us talking, both of us exactly where we wanted to be on this earth. 2 daughters raised summers there. Chuck's ashes went into that water in March, off the end of that dock, on a morning so still the lake looked like paper. The deed, for the record, and this story is all about records, was joint with right of survivorship. The day Chuck died, the cottage became mine, automatically, entirely, as a matter of law. I want you to have that fact now, up front, so you understand something important. My sister's letter never had legal teeth. A handwritten note doesn't override a deed. My lawyer knew it, and once you've heard everything, you'll ask the question everyone asks. Dorothy, if the letter was legally worthless, why not just say so and go home? And I'll answer it now, so it can sit with you through the whole story, because the letter wasn't attacking my deed. It was attacking my marriage. Every person at that table now carried a version of Chuck who kept secrets from me, who'd promised away our dock behind my back and left me to be surprised at a Sunday dinner. The law could protect my cottage friends. It could not protect my husband. Only the paper could do that. And paper was my department. Now, Linda, I promised you I'd be fair to her, and I keep my promises, even the hard ones. My sister is 4 years younger than me, and she has spent her whole life 4 years behind in a race. Nobody but her was running. When we were girls, our family had a cabin, a real one, 1 room, outhouse, on Bass Pond. And those summers were the happiest either of us ever was as children. Daddy sold it in 1971 to cover his debts, and I've come to believe, after everything, that Linda never once got over it. I went to college on scholarship. She stayed home during the bad years with Mother, who was not an easy woman to be home with, and there's a real bill there, friends. I don't pretend otherwise. Linda married twice, divorced twice, sold real estate, sold supplements, sold timeshares. My sister has spent 40 years selling doors to rooms she was never allowed inside. And every summer she came to Loon Lake for 2 weeks, and every summer she said the same sentence at least once, standing on our dock with her wine. This should have been Bass Pond. This is what we were supposed to have. Not, this is lovely. This is what we were supposed to have. Owed friends. My sister ran on owed the way other people run on coffee. While Chuck was alive, it stayed a sentence. Chuck had a gift for Linda. He'd laugh her sharp edges round, fix her car, loan her money we both quietly wrote off. She adored him in her way. And I'll tell you the detail that broke my heart when I finally understood everything. The letter she forged was full of real things, real jokes of his, a real memory of him teaching her to fillet a walleye. She didn't invent my husband, friends. She curated him. Forgers always fail on the ink and succeed on the love. It's the strangest thing about my whole profession. Chuck died in October, and by spring, my sister had begun what I can only call, and I say this as a professional witness, assembling her jury. It started at Easter. Little things dropped at cousins' tables. Chuck always told me I'd never have to worry about a place at the lake. By May, it had hardened. He promised me the cottage, you know. Dorothy knows. She just won't discuss it. My niece called me in June, Linda's own daughter, bless her doubting heart, to ask, carefully, whether it was true Chuck had made arrangements for her mother. That's when I knew a document was coming. You don't spend a season preparing an audience unless you've got a prop in a drawer, friends. The performance always precedes the paper. 311 trials. It always precedes the paper. There was one more scene in those 3 weeks that I haven't told anyone, and it's the one that hardened my spine into what you saw at Ray's office. The second Saturday, I drove up to the cottage alone. I needed the dock, the way you need a place where the truest version of your life is stored. And when I came around the last bend of the lake road, there was a car in my gravel. Linda's. And Linda on my porch, mid-gesture, showing the view to a man in a golf shirt with a tablet and a laser measurer. An appraiser, friends. My sister had brought an appraiser to my cottage with the key we'd given her for her summer weeks 15 years ago, while her forged letter was still warm in the family's hands. She hadn't even waited for the paper to finish working. That's the thing about people who run on ode. The moment the story starts to hold, they begin spending it. I did not make a scene. You know me by now. I parked, I walked up my own steps, and I said, "Good morning. I'm Dorothy Lang. I own this cottage. And you would be?" And the appraiser, a professional, caught in someone else's weather, looked from me to Linda and back, and did the arithmetic on his own liability in about 4 seconds, and was in his car in 90. Linda stood on my porch, chin high, and said, "You're making this so much harder than it has to be." Chuck wanted... "Linda," I said, "give me the key." And here is the detail I keep. Friends, she gave it to me. Immediately. No argument. Because somewhere under all the performance, my sister has always known exactly which documents were real. She put 15 summers of key into my palm, and her eyes filled. And for one heartbeat, I saw the girl from Bass Pond, homesick for a place that stopped existing in 1971. And then the heartbeat passed, and she said something cold about lawyers, and drove away, and I sat on my dock for 2 hours and let the lake do what the lake does. That Monday, the locks got changed, and the locksmith's invoice went into the file, because everything goes into the file, friends. Even the heartbreaks. Especially those. So when Linda let everyone get their pie that Sunday in August and reached into her handbag, I want to be honest with you, in the way this channel is honest. My heart broke and my pulse did not move. Both things were true at once. The sister I'd shared a bed with through the Bass Pond summers was about to do the worst thing anyone had ever done to me. And the examiner she'd apparently never once Googled was already reaching for the edges of the page. The 3 weeks after that dinner were the loneliest of my life, and I include the widowhood, because grief at least is honest company. The letter did its work through the family the way dye moves through water. My phone went quiet in a new way. Not the absence of calls, the presence of held breath. Chuck's brother stopped by just to see how I was, and stood in my kitchen not asking the question he'd come to ask until his 3rd coffee. "Dot, if he wanted her to have it, you'd honor that, wouldn't you?" My own son, my son, friends, called from Portland and said so carefully, "Mom, nobody thinks you have to decide anything right away," which is the sentence people say when they have, in fact, decided. And at the market, the 3rd Saturday, Carol Fitch from the Church Guild touched my arm by the melons and said she was praying for the whole situation, and I understood that the situation had a shape now, and the shape was greedy widow squats on dying man's last wish. My son's call deserves more than the one line I gave it, because it was the worst wound of the 3 weeks, and I promised you the whole ledger. David is 41, an engineer, the most evidence-minded human I ever raised, and even he had drifted. "Mom, nobody thinks you have to decide anything right away." And then, when I stayed quiet, "It's just, Aunt Linda has all these details, the Thanksgiving thing. And it is his handwriting, Mom. I looked at it a long time. I know his handwriting." And I stood in my kitchen with my eyes closed, listening to my own child, raised on my cases, taken to courthouses on school holidays, explain handwriting to me. That's the true power of a good forgery, friends. It doesn't just imitate a hand. It deputizes everyone who loves the victim into doubting her, gently, reasonably, just asking questions, until the widow is the only person in the family who won't concede the obvious. They have a word for how that feels, and the word is alone. If my sister had aimed for the cottage, she'd missed. She'd hit the family instead, dead center. "David," I said, "do you remember what I do?" A pause. "You did documents." "I did documents," I agreed. "Sit tight, sweetheart. Your mother is going to do one more." Linda had done what she does. She'd sold it, door to door, table to table, a season of it, and the prop had closed the deal. And I said nothing, friends. 3 weeks, and the only sentence I gave anyone was the one from the dinner. It's a beautiful letter. You want to know how, so I'll tell you, because it's the working center of this whole story. In 311 trials, I watched what happens to the first person who raises their voice. They become the defendant. It doesn't matter what's true. The room assigns the burden of proof to whoever seems to want something. Mr. Abernathy's rule: your whole job is to not want anything. So I let my sister spend 3 weeks wanting loudly in front of everyone. I had a different appointment to keep. Because here's what I did the morning after that Sunday dinner. I called Raymond Delgado, Chuck's and my estate lawyer for 20 years, the man who drew our wills, and I said 4 sentences. Ray, Linda has produced a letter. I've seen it across a dinner table. Get her to bring the original into your office and make it her idea. And Ray, who has spent 20 years around document people, was quiet a moment, and then he said, and I could hear him starting to smile, Dorothy, tell me, 8 seconds or less? 8 seconds, Ray. I'll set the meeting, he said. Come Tuesday. Bring the kit. Now I'm going to show you what I saw in 8 seconds because you've been patient and because I promised the whole ledger. But to see it the way I saw it, you need the 2-minute version of what 30 years teaches you to look at when someone hands you an old letter. A letter is 4 witnesses in one envelope: the paper, the ink, the hand, and the story. They all have to agree, friends, all 4. A forger only ever rehearses 2 of them. The handwriting itself, was genuinely good. I want to say that on the record, with professional respect and a broken heart, my sister had studied. The capitals were Chuck's. The hook on the Y's was Chuck's. She had, I'd realize later, worked from the best possible models, decades of his letters and cards to her, real ones, which is why the jokes were right and the walleye memory was right, and the voice was so terribly, plausibly warm. On the hand alone, she'd have fooled anyone at that table. She did fool everyone at that table. The story was clever, too. Dated 3 years back, far enough that why didn't he mention it had an answer. He was waiting, sparing Dorothy. You know how private Chuck was, signed, folded twice, carried in a handbag to a Sunday dinner. As theater, excellent. The paper was where it started to whisper. Bright, clean stock, crisp fold lines, a letter allegedly 3 years old, allegedly carried and cherished without one soft edge, without the fiber fatigue a real fold takes on after a season in a drawer. Suggestive, friends, but not conclusive. I've seen honest letters kept beautifully, a whisper, not a witness. The ink is where the whole thing died in 8 seconds at my dining table. The letter was written, confidently, fluently, in Chuck's borrowed hand, in a gel ink of a very particular blue-black shade. I know that shade the way you know a grandchild's voice. It's a pigment formulation that one manufacturer introduced in a promotional line of pens. I will not bore you with the chemistry, though Lord knows I could, that did not exist anywhere, at any price, until the spring of last year, 20 months ago. The letter was dated 3 years ago. My husband, friends, had allegedly written his secret last wish 16 months before the ink was invented. And here is the detail that turns this from expertise into something almost like fate. The reason I know that promotional pen line so intimately, the reason my eye snagged on that shade in 8 seconds across a pie plate, is that I own those pens, a boxed set of them. They were a retirement gift 3 Christmases of mine ago. From Linda. Realty branded, from her office's promotional order. She'd gotten boxes of them free and handed them out that year to everyone. To me, to her daughter, and evidently kept a few for herself. My sister forged my husband's last letter with the same free pens she'd given me for my retirement from the job of catching exactly this. I sat with that for a long evening, friends, and I'm not ashamed to tell you I cried, not over the cottage, over the carelessness of it, because that's what the ink meant in the end. It meant she'd never once, in 40 years, actually listened when I talked about my work. The little sister who I thought resented my career hadn't even resented it accurately. I was being robbed by someone who loved me too lazily to know me. If you've ever been betrayed by family, you know this exact wound. It's never the taking that breaks you. It's the proof of all the years they weren't paying attention. Then I dried my face and I packed the kit. The loop, the scope, the reference cards, the sample book of dated inks that lives in my study like a Bible. And I gathered my exemplars. 42 years of Chuck's genuine hand, the mortgage papers, the anniversary cards, and one more document, the one I'd found in his desk in March and hadn't been able to open until June. But that one I'm saving, friends, the way I saved it then. It comes at the end. It has to. You'll understand. I should tell you about the night before that meeting, because the meeting was 40 minutes, but the night was where it was won. I spent it with my husband's handwriting. All of it. You don't build a comparison case from memory. You build it from exemplars, dated, spanning years, and so I sat at my study desk until 2 in the morning with 42 years of Chuck spread out under the lamp. The mortgage signature, 1987, young and impatient. The girl's report cards, countersigned. The note he left on the kitchen table the morning of my 300th trial. Knock 'em dead, expert, eggs in the pan. 30 anniversary cards. He never missed one, and he never once signed them Chuck. Always C. Always just the one letter, with the little tail he put on it, because, he said, "You're the only one who gets the abbreviated me." And somewhere past midnight, doing the work, I stopped being able to hold the two documents apart, the professional one and the human one. And I put my head down on my husband's handwriting and cried like the widow I hadn't had time to be since the pie was served. Because that's what my sister's letter had actually stolen, friends. Not the cottage. The cottage was never leaving. It stole this, the pure hearing of his voice in his hand. For 3 weeks, every loop and hook of Chuck's writing had become evidence to me, a thing to measure instead of a thing to miss. Forgery poisons the well it draws from. That's the crime under the crime, and no statute covers it. Then I blew my nose, the way the women in these stories do, and I finished building the exhibit set because the fastest way to get his voice back was to finish the job. By 2 a.m., I had it all cased and tabbed. On top, deliberately, I placed one anniversary card, our 40th, open to the page where the real C lived. Not for the comparison, friends. For me. Every expert carries one exhibit that isn't for the jury. Ray took me aside before Linda arrived that Tuesday into the little hallway by his conference room, and what he said there belongs in this story. 20 years, Dorothy. I drew your wills, both of you, twice. And every time Chuck sat in that chair, he nodded at the conference room. He said some version of the same thing. Keep it simple, Ray. Everything to Dot. She's the only person I've ever met who can't be fooled about what's real. Ray straightened his cuffs. So you'll forgive me if I've been looking forward to this meeting somewhat improperly. A man tells me for 20 years that his wife can't be fooled, and then somebody tries this? He opened the door for me. In my house? With paper? Friends, everyone should get to watch their late husband's lawyer be offended on their behalf. It's better than flowers. Tuesday came, Ray's office, the long conference table, and Linda arrived carrying the letter in a plastic sleeve. Her idea. Ray had made sure of it. Protect the original. Linda, it's valuable. Flanked by her daughter and by Chuck's brother, her jury of 2. And she sat down across from me with the expression of a woman arriving at her own coronation. Dorothy, she said, gently, for the audience. I hope we can do this with love. With love, I agreed, and with the original. And I set my kit bag on the table, and I watched my sister notice it, and I watched her not know what it was. One last time, all the way to the end, not know what it was. Ray ran the meeting like the 20-year professional he is, which is to say, he let Linda run it first. she presented. Oh, friends, she presented, the story polished by 3 weeks of rehearsal on the family circuit. Chuck pulling her aside at Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Chuck saying, Dorothy has her work, her world, but you, Linny, you never got your bass pond. Chuck asking her to keep the letter safe until the right moment. Her daughter dabbed her eyes. Chuck's brother nodded along, a man visibly relieved to be at the meeting where the awkward thing gets settled. And Ray listened with his hands folded, and when she finished, he said mildly, Thank you, Linda. For the file, we'll want to authenticate. Pure formality. Dorothy, you brought comparison samples? She brought... Linda's chin came up. I'm sorry. Dorothy is not exactly a neutral party. No, Ray agreed pleasantly. She's a court-qualified forensic document examiner with 311 appearances, whose CV I keep on file, and whose findings we can send to any independent examiner you'd like to hire at your own expense afterward. But I suspect, and here Ray permitted himself the smile I will be describing to you for the rest of my life, the smile of a man 20 years patient. We won't need to send anything anywhere. Dorothy, show her the date. I won't perform the next 40 minutes for you note by note, though I remember everyone. I'll give you the shape of it because the shape is the point. I did it properly, fully, out loud in plain English, the way I did it 311 times for juries, because there was a jury in that room. There'd been a jury since Easter. I laid Chuck's genuine hand alongside the letter, and I showed them the things that were right. I gave her craft its due, line by line, and I watched my sister's confidence bloom one last time as I did it, because she thought praise was a verdict. And then I took out the loop and the reference book with its dated ink cards, and I walked that room, step by patient step, from the bright, unfatigued paper, to the fold lines, to the pigment, to the card in my book, manufacturer's release date printed in the corner, 20 months old. And I set the free realty pen from the boxed set she'd given me for my retirement down on the table beside her letter. And I said, as gently as I have ever said anything under oath, The hand is very good. Linda. The ink is 20 months old. Chuck has been gone for 10. This letter wasn't written 3 years ago. It was written this spring, with this pen, by someone who loved him enough to get his whys right, and knew me so little she used my own retirement gift to do it. The silence in a courtroom when a document dies is a particular silence. I'd heard it 300 times. I had never heard it with my sister inside it. I'll give you 2 moments from inside those 40 minutes because the shape needs its corners. The first, when I explained the hook on his whys, how a habit like that is a body remembering, not a hand drawing. I passed around the 40th anniversary card so they could see the true hook beside the borrowed one. And Chuck's brother held that card a long time, much longer than the comparison needed. He wasn't examining, friends. He was visiting. That's when I knew the room had already crossed back to me, before a word about ink, because the real Chuck was on the table now, and everyone could feel the difference between a man and an impersonation, even if only one of us could testify to it. The second, when I set the ink card down, release date printed in the corner, 20 months old, Linda's daughter did the thing every juror I've ever respected does. She didn't look at me, and she didn't look at her mother. She reached over, turned the reference book toward herself, and checked it. Verified it with her own eyes, independently, the youngest person in the room and the only one doing the work. Remember that, friends, when you despair of the next generation. Somewhere in every family there is one person who reads the footnotes, and they are the whole future of the truth. Her daughter looked at the pen and then at her mother and said, Mom. Just that. One syllable with a whole childhood curdling inside it. Chuck's brother put his hand over his mouth. And Linda? I want you to have exactly what Linda did, because it's the truest thing in this story. Linda looked at the ink card for a long moment, and then she looked up at me. And what came out of her, after 63 years, was not a confession and not an apology. It was, you always have to be the expert. You couldn't just let me have one thing. There it was, friends. The whole engine, finally out of the chassis. Not I'm sorry, not I was desperate. You couldn't let me have one thing, as if the cottage were a dinner roll, as if Chuck's voice were a coat I'd refused to lend. 50 years of ode arriving at its destination. And here, right here, is where this story becomes mine instead of hers, because I had a choice at that table, and I want to walk you through it honestly. Ray had already told me in the hallway, quietly, what the letter now was. Not a family embarrassment. Evidence. Forgery of an instrument. Attempted fraud. Words with statutes. A file that could go across the street to people whose letterhead ends careers. One nod from me, friends. The jury she'd assembled all spring would become witnesses by fall. And I looked at my sister, flushed, cornered, still furious, still 4 years behind in a race no one was running. And I heard Mr. Abernathy in my ear 50 years back. The document never wants anything. Your job is to not want anything either. And I discovered, sitting in that leather chair, that it was true. I didn't want her ruin. I wanted precisely one thing on this earth, and it wasn't even the cottage. I wanted my husband's voice back, the real one. So I said, "No charges, Ray." And before the relief could finish arriving on my sister's face, "On terms, Linda, you'll write one more letter. A real one, in your own hand, to everyone who saw the forgery. 14 people. You'll tell them what the letter was when you wrote it, and that Chuck never promised you anything. Every word true. I'll be checking, dear. It's rather my area. And then you and I are going to be sisters at a distance for a while. Not forever, a while. The length is up to you, and it will be measured in true sentences." She wrote it. It took her 9 days, and I suspect several drafts, and it arrived in 14 mailboxes in an envelope so heavy with shame you could feel it through the paper. And it was, friends, my professional assessment, the first fully authentic document my sister ever produced. I should tell you what the 14 letters did when they landed, because a true document moves through a family exactly the way the forged one had, die through water, only in reverse. Carol Fitch from the Church Guild called me the very afternoon hers arrived and had the grace to cry. And the following Sunday, there was a tater-tot hot dish on my porch with no note, which in Minnesota is a formal apology, notarized. 2 cousins I hadn't heard from since the funeral sent cards. And Chuck's brother's wife, who all through the 3 weeks had been the quietest and coldest of the jury, showed up on my porch with a lasagna and a sentence I've decided to keep. I believed the letter because I wanted there to be one more page of him. I think we all did. She knew that about us. That's what she used. That's as sharp a description of how forgery works on grief as anything in my 30 years of casework, friends, and it came from a retired dental hygienist holding a lasagna. Never underestimate a family's capacity to understand itself once somebody insists on the true documents. The family put its breath back. My son called from Portland and stayed on the phone 2 hours, most of it apologizing, some of it just quiet. Chuck's brother showed up with his coffee and stood in my kitchen and said, "Dot, I read a dead man's mail against his widow. I don't know what to do with that." "Sit with it," I told him. "That's all. Sit with it. That's what documents make us do. Now the ledger, and then the document I've been saving, because I keep my promises and you've earned it." The cottage opened for the season late, but it opened. My daughters came up in July with the grandchildren, and the dock wobbled in the spot where it tells you where you are, and my granddaughter caught her first walleye off the end of it, and nobody at all taught her to fillet it, because that grief is still a hallway I walk quickly past. The deed sits where it has always sat. It was never in danger, friends. I told you that at the start, and I meant it. Deeds are sturdy. It's the versions of people that need an examiner. Linda and I are in our while. She honored the distance for most of a year. Then, in April, a card arrived. Real ink, ordinary drugstore ballpoint. I checked out of incurable habit and then laughed at myself in my own hallway. And it said in my sister's true hand, "I've started seeing someone, a counselor, I mean. She asked me when Bass Pond was sold and I cried for 1 hour. I am not asking for anything. I just wanted one true sentence on the record. L." That's the whole card, friends. I've had it appraised by the only expert I trust. It's genuine. We had coffee in May, at a diner halfway between our houses. Halfway was her suggestion, and the choice of a place neither of us owned was, I thought, the most self-aware thing my sister has done in this century. We talked about Mother mostly. It's a start. Documents first, then paper cups of coffee, then, maybe, a doc. In that order. Trust, like ink, has a chemistry, and it does not dry on anyone's schedule. Her daughter, my niece, the one whose mom cracked the room, calls me every other Sunday now and came to the lake in August and asked me to show her the ink cards and sat with the loop over her own mother's forgery for a long, quiet time. "It's really good," she finally said wretchedly. "It is," I said. "Your mother is talented, sweetheart." Talent was never the missing part. She's the one who convinced Linda about the counselor. The generation that watches the meeting learns more than anyone at the table. I've seen it in courtrooms for 30 years. And Ray Delgado sent me a Christmas card with a fountain pen enclosed and a note reading, "For true sentences only," and has since retired me, mind you. 3 quiet little matters, a disputed codicil, a suspicious signature on a truck title, a love letter a client needed dated before she'd let it break her heart. I charge him pie, business is steady. Which brings me to the drawer in Chuck's desk and the document I found in March and couldn't open until June and have never shown a single soul until tonight. It's an envelope, my name on it, in the hand I'd know through a wall, the careful capitals, the hook on the Y. Chuck was a shop teacher, friends. He measured twice his whole life, and it turns out he'd measured this too. Inside, 1 page, dated 2 years before he died, back when the doctors first started using their careful words. And I'm going to read you the middle of it, because the middle is the part this whole story was secretly about. Dot. If you're reading this, I've gone on ahead, and knowing you, you've already checked this letter for authenticity. It's real. Look at the Y's. The cottage is yours, but you knew that. Paper was always your department. Here's my department. Don't let the lake get quiet. Fill it up. Your sister will need a week every summer, even if she never learns how to ask for it right, especially then. She's been homesick her whole life for a place that stopped existing in 1971, and the closest thing left to Bass Pond is our dock, and the closest thing to Daddy fixing it is you. Be the expert about the ink, Dorothy. Be a sister about everything else. All my love, C. He knew, friends. Not the letter, not the forgery. He couldn't have known that. He knew her. He knew both of us, all the way down, the way only the quiet man on the dock ever knows a family. And he left me, in writing, dated, authentic, 4 witnesses in agreement. The one instruction that 30 years of training could never have produced on its own. The ink is your job. The sister is your choice. I made the choice in Ray's office before I ever reopened his envelope. That's the part I hold on to, late on the dock, when the water looks like paper. I got there on my own, but it's a very fine thing, at 67, to have it in your husband's hand that he'd have ruled the same way. And since you've stayed this long, one more entry for the ledger, the strangest one. In September, a letter arrived from the County Forensic Society. Would I consider teaching the fall seminar on questioned documents the week after the state fair? I'd declined that invitation for 4 straight years of retirement. This year I said yes, and I built the whole seminar around a single anonymized case study, the Cottage letter. Hand, story, paper, ink, in that order, exactly as you heard it tonight. 22 young examiners worked it cold. 19 caught the paper, 11 caught the ink. But my favorite student, A sergeant's daughter from 2 counties over, footnote reader, front row, raised her hand before I'd even passed out the exhibits and said, "Before the science, who benefits and who set the table?" And I thought, there it is. Mr. Abernathy, wherever you are, the document still never wants anything. But somebody always serves the pie first. You'll want to know where the 2 letters live now, because objects deserve endings too. The forgery is in Ray's office safe, sealed in its plastic sleeve, labeled in his paralegal's tidy print. Not as a threat, friends. We're past that. As a fact. Families need one incorruptible copy of what actually happened, kept somewhere no future version of the story can reach it. Ray calls it the exhibit that keeps the peace. And he's right. Nothing in my family has needed relitigating since, because everyone knows the original exists. That's the quiet second service of true documents. They don't just settle the past, they discipline the future. And Chuck's real letter, the one from the drawer, lives in my examiner's kit, tucked flat against the sample book of dated inks, where my hand finds it every time I reach for the loop. My daughters think it should be framed. But a frame is for finished things, friends, and that letter is still working. Every time some new quiet matter of Ray's opens the kit, there it is. The exemplar. The standard against which I measure every document, and if I'm honest, most people. Be the expert about the ink. Be a sister about everything else. Next July, if the true sentences keep arriving at their current rate, there may be a week at the lake with my sister in it. The dock will wobble in the spot that tells you where you are. We'll see. I've learned not to date documents before they're written. One practical postscript, because this channel believes in homework. After the seminar, 3 of my students asked what ordinary families, no loop, no ink cards, can actually do. Here is the examiner's short list, free of charge. Keep originals, not photographs of originals. Date things in your own hand, in full, year included. If a document surfaces after a death, ask 2 questions before you ask any expert. Who benefits and where has it been living? Because paper, like a witness, must account for its whereabouts. And if the story arrives before the paper does, friends, if you've been hearing about a promise for a season before anyone produces a page, you already know what's coming to dinner. Wait for the pie. Here is the thing I'd want slipped under your door tonight from a woman who spent her life proving what's real. When someone waves a piece of paper at your family, a letter, a promise, he always said, the paper is almost never the real document. The real document is the years. How he actually lived, what she actually did, who showed up, and who kept score. That's the file, friends, and everyone in the family holds a certified copy if they're brave enough to consult it. Forgery only works on people who'd rather read one dramatic page than 40 years of ordinary evidence. So keep your originals safe, your deeds, your wills, yes, do that this week. But keep the other originals safer. Say the true sentences out loud while everyone's alive to witness them. My husband told me he loved me 42 years' worth of ordinary Tuesdays, and when the one fraudulent page arrived, it never stood a chance, because I held the exemplars. Make sure your people hold yours. That's my story. Now slide yours across the table. At what point did you spot the forgery? The paper, the ink, or just the pie timing? Has a piece of paper ever divided your family? A will, a letter, a promise somebody remembered? Write it below. I examine every comment slowly and twice. It's an occupational hazard. And if 65 and Sunny has earned a spot in your evenings, subscribe. The next quiet woman is already telling me her story. Good night from the dock.